For today's double indie game review, we're taking a look at two very different takes on their respective genres with Burnhouse Lane and Shardpunk Verminfall. Burnhouse Lane comes from Harvester Games, the makers of the very amazing The Cat Lady. One of the best adventure games I played in the last decade, and one that is certainly not for kids. And that pattern certainly holds up here. We play as Angie Weather, a nurse who is unfortunately dying of cancer. With 6 months to live, she takes one last job to help out an elderly man in the countryside, where she stumbles upon the mysterious Burnhouse Lane, and is given a chance to save her life if she can perform 5 tasks. Now, this being a very story-driven game, and a very mature game, we're going back into slideshow mode. The game is played kind of like a 2D action-adventure, with Angie moving across horizontally through each area, and finding multiple items and getting to some basic combat. One of the big things about Burnhouse Lane compared to the previous games is that there's a little bit more of an action focus. Angie gets a dodge that takes about 5 seconds to recharge, and there are boss fights. Now, if you have any familiarity with action-based design and action combat, the game shouldn't give you too much of a trouble. If you're going into this expecting like a pure point-and-click adventure game, it may be a little tricky in some spots. As with the previous games, the format is told over chapter by chapter. Each chapter has its own specific puzzles, items to collect, things to do, and that sort of thing. And there is some carryover in terms of decision making that goes into getting one of the game's multiple endings. Now, the story of this one, once again, is really well done. It is on the mature side, as we're dealing with all kinds of concepts from the dangers of, well, smoking, to more existential stuff, such as dying young, the thought about outliving your relatives and your loved ones, and even just the act of isolationism and being alone. And yes, there's going to be lots of swearing along the way as well. In terms of the puzzle design and puzzle complexity, I would say this is on the moderate side. There is only one puzzle in the entire game that I had to look up the solution for it, but most of the puzzles in this game are going to revolve around you exploring a general area, picking up anything and everything that could possibly be used, and then kind of working your way through it. There are also a few platforming sections that, once again, if you have any familiarity with the genre, shouldn't give you too much trouble. But as I said a few minutes ago, Burnhouse Lane is a little bit more action focused compared to their previous titles. There is one achievement to beat a boss using the hand axe that it can be a pain to do. Thankfully, it's an optional achievement, but definitely one that can cause you some trouble. All in all, the story did keep me guessing until the very end, and I really have come to enjoy Harvester Games stories, and this one is certainly no exception. In terms of problems I have with the game, for a game that is dealing with the concepts of death, I guess it should come as no surprise that there's a few quality of life issues here and there. So the first one is that the game does not feature multiple save slots. This doesn't sound too bad, but this is a game where there are multiple endings and multiple conditions that you will need to achieve. And unlike some of the other games where you could set up backup save so you can quickly make another decision and take that route, this time you're going to have to restart the game all the way if you want to go down each one of the game's endings, especially if you want to attempt the golden ending. Another problem is that there is no way to fast forward or skip cutscenes, which of course makes the act of replaying this game a little bit slower than I would like. Other than that, again, this is one of those games that you are either going to be all in or all out of, especially considering the tone and the more mature story. I don't know if I would say this game goes as hardcore or as mature as The Cat Lady, but again, if you're used to something like the Telltale games, Watchet Eye, or more, I guess, quote-unquote, light-hearted adventure games that came out over the past decade, this one, again, is on the darker side, and there is some very gratuitous images as well in this game. But if you don't mind violence and looking for a very serious and very satisfying story to play, I highly recommend checking out Burnhouse Lane. And if you are in the mood for more, definitely check out their previous games, especially the Cat Lady. With that said, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going tactical strategy with Shardpunk Verminfall. And before we do that, if you're interested in my thoughts on design, then check out my game design books. For entry-level students, we have 20 Essential Games to Study, and then the Game Design Deep Dive series that takes an extensive look at different genres, with more coming soon. Shardpunk Verminfall is a tactical strategy meets roguelike. When our capital city is overrun by rat people, we are now on a desperate mission to get to the capital with a weapon that can hopefully turn the tide. The flow of this one is that you'll go between the different chapters by choosing node by node on kind of your campaign map. Each node will have different modifiers and rules and so on before you go into the actual XCOM style tactical strategy. You'll start with 3 characters, but you'll gain access to more, and as well as unlocking more personalities you can choose at the start. The general gameplay here is definitely classic XCOM, as you'll have to make use of Overwatch, moving from cover to cover, and hopefully not getting swarmed by too many enemies. Each map is procedurally generated with resources that you can go out of your way to collect. This is important because you'll be able to use these to craft healing items, grenades, as well as finding upgrade materials to improve your weapons and characters at kind of like your campsite at the end of each map. Speaking of the end of each map, when you get to the kind of bunker door, you'll need to decide whether or not to break it using a limited resource or hold out for X number of turns before you make your escape. Now, the big thing about Shardpunk from its general combat perspective is that unlike XCOM, where you're kind of given freedom to hold off and move at your own pace, enemy groups will spawn in after a certain number of turns, and you're going to have to keep moving forward in order to kind of stay ahead of them and make it to the end. As for the general kind of strategy layer or tactical strategy, the game again hits all the same notes and beats. A major decision in this one is that instead of having ammo, your weapons can overheat. And if they overheat, you can risk firing a shot for more damage, but it can come back and hurt you. And remember, health carries over as persistent from map to map. As you go through, enemies become stronger, you'll find more diverse ones to fight, and there is a kind of persistence with unlocking again new characters, new abilities that can show up, using kind of the game's achievement / medal system. One thing that I did like, that I haven't really seen before in a tactical strategy game that Shardpunk does, is the idea of having kind of special co-op moves that can happen. What ends up happening here is that if multiple characters perform a certain set of actions during their turn, they'll unlock this kind of special combo modifier that lasts for the rest of the turn and so on. For instance, if 2 characters go into Overwatch and they're standing right next to each other, both characters will gain increased accuracy on their Overwatch shot for that turn. It's a nice little way of adding a little bit more personality to the characters and to the combat itself. With everything said, however, I do have some issues with the game. Shardpunk is set up while it's trying to be like an XCOM-like, with a focus on a grand campaign and persistent elements. It's also played like a roguelike, where it can be very easy to lose your entire run, sometimes due to the RNG of attacks hitting, and sometimes just due to bad luck or lack of information. My whole run came to an end because I didn't really get any detail about how an enemy operated until it was far too late to realize that it was a kamikaze and there was no way to stop it. And when we have like games that have like this much of weightiness to the runs, it can become very hard to have that motivation to keep playing run after run. Now, the different characters are interesting, and the game is kind of set up in that XCOM fashion, where each character starts out, or I should say more like the Firaxis XComs, where each character starts out with a very useful ability, and this can be expanded further. So you're not always going back to zero when you restart a run. They're pretty capable from the onset. But again, it can be very frustrating to get far in the campaign, have a bad turn, or make a mistake, and your entire run is basically a wash. And the persistent elements are mainly there to unlock new content. You're not going to unlock, say, every character starts with 10 times more health, or does 15% more damage, or elements along those lines. So, with that said, Shardpunk Verminfall, I would say, is an interesting kind of strategy RPG, or tactical strategy, how we want to call them. And if you're looking for something a little bit different, and don't mind the challenge and, the randomness getting your way, I would give this one a check. If you're not a fan of tactical strategy games, then I don't think this is going to be the one that's going to try and get you into it. But with all that said, we're going to wrap up this double review here. I'd like to thank the Shardpunk developer for giving me a key. Burnhouse Lane was played with a retail key. If you let me take your game for a future review, please reach out. Do all the YouTubing stuff people tell you to do. Be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where you examine the art and science of games.